All right, we're live. We both made it home after this weekend's festivities where Markham got himself a new desk.
Yeah, I got this new. It was so funny because this is the Oval Office at the Nixon Library, the exact replica of the Oval Office. And there are docents who take you into each segment of the library. And this is the replica of the Oval Office. And the woman at some point at the end of her rap said, "Feel free to sit behind the desk." So I jumped at it and picked up the phone and started making calls, which was pretty funny. And then this photo was taken of me behind the desk. That's the actual Nixonian. It was actually a desk that JFK had also, because it had the little trap door in the front of it where John famously took the photo of him going in and out of the trap door beneath this desk. And the desk was built not for either one of these two presidents. It was built for FDR. And that was designed to cover up the leg braces on his wheelchair so you couldn't see underneath, Eric. You know what I mean? Like normal, like a desk is normally with that space in between. They put that door in there, which John famously was playing around going in and out while his father was sitting behind the desk. Anyway, that's a photo from the exact replica of the Oval Office.
The phone call was recorded, right?
Absolutely. Everything. I recorded it, and Nixon in the afterlife recorded it. Let me tell you something. This is a spectacular library / museum. If anybody is ever down there in Eastern Orange County, the house he grew up in is right on the premises, as is the helicopter he landed in. Oddly enough, or took off from. This is obviously me and Nixon at the Rose Bowl parade here in Pasadena. But they have room after room after room, incredibly well-designed exhibits, blown up newspaper, taped exhibits, headphone exhibits that you can put on headphones, room after room. It's just astounding with docents who really know what they're talking about. It's incredibly well crafted, incredibly well put together. Unfortunately, it's very expensive. I mean, not the ticket, but to try to put on an event there. And outside is the house that he was born and raised in, made by a kit, not a Sears Roebuck kit, but a kit that they were never able to determine the origin. They believe the kit of the home may have been brought to them by a local lumber company who also distributed back in those days home kits. But they did a lot of research and eliminated Sears Roebuck and eliminated Montgomery Ward as to this kit. But it looks like a regular house. You can't tell if it's a kit. Absolutely insanely preserved. To go through the house is amazing. And it's right next door to the library museum, which is more of a museum than a library. I don't know if it does it justice calling it a library, but the museum is really, what's so wonderful about this place. And it lets all the warts be shown there. They're not, I always thought they'd be covering stuff up, that there would be a cover up of the cover up, but it's not. There's a lot of stuff to see there, and it doesn't paint a completely rosy picture of Nixon. Oddities that were there that I found was some of the oddities tucked away. Willie Mays' 600th home run bat that someone got and gave to Nixon. There are memorabilia that people gave to Nixon that are, obviously the guns are there from Elvis, that Elvis came to the White House with and presented these two pearl-handled, I think they're 45s with some bullets. That's there. But just an amazing amount of material in that library. Outside, oddly enough, or maybe not oddly enough, both him and Pat, right between the library building and their home, are their graves. They're right there, literally at your feet, next to her rose garden. I was surprised. I didn't know that they were buried there. And it's right on the pathway as you're walking to the house. Amazing amount of history in that library.
Amazing. Did you go on Sunday or on Saturday?
I went on Sunday.
Sunday, okay. I was like trying to figure out how you pulled that one off.
Well, I mean, I have time on my hands. Sunday, I went over in the morning. Saturday, I had things to do. But just want to thank everyone for the meetup on Friday and Saturday. If you were supposed to get a script, please tell Eric that if you didn't get one, because somehow I ended up with 3 or 4 left over that I wanted to autograph for whoever was there who did not get it, because I had an exact number for the amount of people on Friday night in that VIP meetup there with the live show. So if you did not get it, please contact Eric and we'll mail you one autographed. One of the benefits of being a VIP, I guess. And Saturday we had the Q&A. That was fun. Got a little raucous, but that's to be expected once you have teenage drinking and drugs being consumed, and obviously strippers. I mean, what do you expect? One of the members of the board, I think, might be a guest of ours today of the Nixon Library. But I just wanted to give a background and a shout out to everyone who came to the events, because it was better than I expected. The food was great. Everything kind of went. I'm just shocked that anything works in this day and age. It's just me. I don't believe it. I always prepare for the worst, and then I'm pleasantly surprised, Eric, when stuff actually works like it's supposed to. Believe me, my life, everything goes wrong. It's like the Rodney Dangerfield thing. So when things work, I am always pleasantly surprised. I wanted to write a book when I was at Lampoon. We were going to do it as a parody of The Power of Positive Thinking. It's called The Power of Negative Thinking. And if you think negatively and certain things turn out, and it's a victory. So it wasn't that much of a fictional idea. Actually, I think the book could have sold in a weird, sarcastic way. But we're going to talk in a couple of seconds with our guest about another person that the guest knew. And I just wanted to give a proper intro to the guest. There's a picture of him on the right, one of the tallest guests we've ever had. Probably, I think he's 7.
I don't know, Max. Max is pretty tall.
Max was tall, but this guy on the right, obviously 7'3" at this point. Nixon, of course, 6'11". There's Nixon it's about to do this jig, which is kind of funny. That's the actual Oval Office, I believe. And, I mean, I have questions that I ask that are so bizarre of these docents, but to their credit, they were able to answer every single question, shockingly. Like, where did he go? Where's the bathroom when you're in the Oval Office? Because you look around, and I had to go to the bathroom, so I thought maybe there was a bathroom. And she said, no, it was through this door down the hall, and there was another little office with a bathroom. So just the stupid questions that I asked. But let me just give you the background on this guest here. Geoff Shepard's, this is the first book I read of Geoff Shepard. And Geoff Shepard is going to be our guest in a couple minutes. This is the first one I read of Geoff Shepard's. I think this was his first book. And we covered this when we started to get into Chappaquiddick with Ted Kennedy. And this is a book called The Secret Plot to Make Ted Kennedy President, which I highly recommend. I believe the second book is The Nixon Conspiracy, Watergate, and the Plot to Remove the President here, which is my favorite of the Troika. I think there's 3 of them. And then the third one is the real, I could be wrong, maybe there's 4, is the real Watergate Scandal, Collusion, Conspiracy, and the Plot that brought Nixon down. I highly recommend you pick up all 3 of these books.
All 3 links are in the description.
Oh, that makes it easier. All 3 links are in the description. And this being the 50th anniversary of Nixon's resignation, which was why we were down at the Nixon Library August 9th and 10th. I wish Geoff could have been there with us, but he was busy doing something else, which he's going to get into in a couple of seconds. But I just wanted to read some of the background of this guy. Geoff Shepard joined the Nixon administration as a White House fellow directly out of Harvard Law School and became a senior member of the Domestic Counsel staff. Later, as Deputy Defense Counsel, he had a front row seat for the political drama that toppled the president and sent his closest aides to prison. There's a couple of pull quotes here. Document by document, Shepard builds an ironclad case against the very prosecutors who drove Nixon from office. That's from Hugh Hewitt. The Real Watergate Scandal is one of the most valuable books ever published on the Nixon presidency. It's the biggest Watergate bombshell to hit since the Nixon tapes in 1973, with implications at once historic and relevant today. That's from James Rosen, author of The Strong Man, John Mitchell, and The Secrets of Watergate, who's going to be a guest on the show probably in September. This is my favorite one. Watergate was a coup d'etat that overturned the largest landslide in American history and destroyed a president who had humiliated the liberal establishment. Geoff Shepard's investigative work has unearthed buried elements of the plot that brought down the 37th president. That's from Patrick J. Buchanan, author of The Greatest Comeback, How Richard Nixon Rose from Defeat to Create the New Majority, which I also recommend, which is a fantastic book. Geoff and I began our careers on the Nixon White House staff, and we've worked together many times since. The disclosures in his latest book of wrongdoing by the special prosecutors are not just astonishing, they're jaw-dropping. The Nixon Conspiracy is a must-read for anyone who cares about the abuse of power. That's from K.T. McFarland. Geoff and I worked together on Nixon's staff. He's shown dogged determination in uncovering long secret documents that challenge all we've been told about how Watergate unfolded. Geoff's discovered truths that are emerging at last. That's from Dwight Chapin. And then the last one I'll read is Geoff was in my criminal law class in my first year of teaching at Harvard and was clearly paying attention. I take no credit, but some pride in his thoughtful insights and analysis of Watergate issues. That's from the Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law Emeritus, Harvard Law School, Alan M. Dershowitz. And with that, why don't we bring Geoff on to explain himself probably better than I can at this point. Geoff, welcome back.
Mark, good to be with you and with Eric. This is going to be a fun session.
Mm-hmm.
I would point out one small error. You have the order of the books slightly off.
Okay.
First book is Ted Kennedy. Second book is Real Watergate Scandal. And the third book is The Nixon Conspiracy. And because of the publicity surrounding the 50th anniversary, Amazon has run out of the last two books. So if you go on my website, you can order it directly from the Nixon Foundation out there in Yorba Linda, and you get a signed copy. So
that's interesting.
That website is www.shepardonwatergate.com. Okay, and when they show you the books, there's a way of ordering it from the foundation. They're the only ones that have them. The first book is out of print. If you go on Amazon, you can buy an audio copy. That's available through audio, but that's it.
Okay.
But the other two are pretty well stocked at the Nixon Library.
I think they're in. Am I mistaken? Did I see them in the gift store there?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
They rotate books through.
Yeah.
But since my books deal directly with Watergate and his resignation, I'm told they're on display.
Okay. Well, I could vouch for that. I think I saw them the other day. Now, tell me about the movie. That's what I wanted you to help plug and bring the audience into this.
Add one other thing.
Go ahead, Geoff.
What's unique about his house is that's where his house has always sat. They did not move the house.
Right.
They built the library on the site where the house is.
Right.
It's hugely unique.
Wow.
And one of his relatives, when he moved out, bought the furniture. So the furniture in the house is the furniture that was there when Nixon was born and growing up.
Wow.
For his first few years. So
one of the docents said Harold would come back and just hang around the house. His youngest brother would just show up at the house and just have a look.
Understandably so.
It was his house.
No, I think you mean that's
the youngest brother, whoever.
The youngest.
Not Harold.
I'm blanking on his name. Neat guy. I knew him quite well.
He passed away recently, I guess.
Yes, he did. He's
okay.
Substantially younger than Dick Nixon was, but he was a geologist.
Right. That's what she
lived
said.
in the Seattle area. And
Yeah.
but for the fact I'm in my 80th year, I could probably remember his name.
Mm-hmm.
Neat guy. And what was so
Edward?
much fun about him, as he aged, he was much younger than President Nixon. As he aged, he began to look exactly like the Nixon I worked with when I was
Wow.
in the White House.
Wow.
And
That's
I couldn't
creepy.
take my eyes off him.
Wow.
You know, and he had the same kind of movements and motions. And I would think, good heavens, that's the man himself.
Wow.
It was quite strange.
Well, the
Edward
library
is
what's his name? Eric?
Edward.
Oh,
Yeah,
Edward.
Edward.
Okay,
Thank
Edward.
you.
The
Thank you.
library
Good
is
man.
spectacular, Geoff, by the way. The library is unbelievably entertaining for anyone who could get down
It's
there.
hugely detailed. They had an awful lot to work with. You know, Nixon was not only a very, very successful presidency, but he spent his life in politics. So they've got, I don't know if it's on display right now, the station wagon he campaigned with in 1946. And
That I did not
and
see.
you're right, the helicopter. They got the, again, I don't know if it's currently on display, the car, the car that he would parade in, the Beast.
Oh,
You
I
know,
did not see
it's,
that. That was
I
not
think
on
it's a
display.
Lincoln.
I did not see that.
You know, Secret Service agents and sideboards where they would stand and that sort of thing. Huge stuff on China, huge stuff on his domestic achievements.
The China stuff is spectacular.
Yeah. So what we've done in connection with the 50th anniversary,
Right on.
we have produced a documentary. And for the first time on film, it's an hour and 10 minutes. And it brings together the whole Watergate story, how it came about, the documents that I've uncovered, and the opinions of judges and lawyers on the importance of those documents. You know, what distinguishes my work from other people's books and articles is I have a paper trail that the prosecutors and judges left that prove secret meetings, secret memos, secret coordination by and between representatives of all three branches of government. The special prosecutors were meeting with the judges were meeting with people on the Hill were meeting with the prosecutors, and it's a triangle. And there was communication going back and forth amongst all three branches, all secret, all well hidden, but uncovered by me beginning in 2013.
Wow.
There were 4 caches of documents that became uncovered in just the past 10 years because the top 3 Watergate prosecutors took their records with them when they went home. And you're not supposed to do that.
This is Jaworski. You're referring to Jaworski.
Oh, Leon Jaworski's surfaced
Cox.
first.
Right.
Well, Cox took his, but Cox had virtually no records.
Right.
If you gave him a memo, he'd make notations and give it back to you.
Gotcha.
But his first hire, also from Harvard Law School, is a guy named James Vorenberg, and he took comprehensive staff meeting notes at every staff meeting because he was going to write the report at the end of their tenure. He took all of them back to Harvard, and they surfaced in 2015. And it describes these meetings where they're making these decisions of who to indict and how to respond to different challenges. And then there was a gentleman named Phil Lacavara, who was counsel to the special prosecutor, smart lawyer. But he took his papers with him when he left, and they didn't come back to the library till 2020.
Wow. What
And
about
he-
did Ben Venista take his papers with him, or
I don't believe that he did, although if he did, he didn't give them back. Now,
okay.
he wrote a book right afterwards.
Yeah,
He was
that was the first book, right?
it was a very, very early book called Stonewall.
Stonewall.
Some really interesting revelations in Stonewall, how much Archie Cox disliked John Dean and thought John Dean was the center. He said, he quotes him at the end, and he says, if everything else goes wrong, he said, Archie Cox was determined that John Dean would be prosecuted no matter what. And he said, if everything else goes wrong in our investigations, the one thing I can cling to is John Dean's venality. And they described that in great detail, how much. And then, of course, Archie is politely asked to leave the staff in the what's called the Saturday Night Massacre. And Jaworski takes his place, and the staff fastens on to John Dean as their principal witness.
Right. Let's hold on before we get into John Dean. Where can we find the movie? Let me get back to the movie.
Links in the description.
Okay. So
yeah, but the movie is on its own website.
Right.
Okay.
www.watergatesecrets.com.
One word. www.
One word. Watergatesecrets.com.
Okay.
You go to the website. You can rent or purchase the movie.
Love that.
Very, very instructive.
Now tell me what happened. We've had guests go to Tucker and never come back. You're the first person to go to the outer world and to meet with the Tuckers and return. Yeah. What is that world like, Geoff, out there in the
Well,
Tucker
it's up
world?
in the hinterlands of Maine.
Okay.
And you know, the big federal highway from the tip of Maine to the bottom of Florida is I-95, straight up and down the East Coast. Well, you go almost to the very end, up in the top, above Augusta, and 50 miles off of I-95 is this town. I think the name of the town is Bethel. At least I stayed in the Bethel Inn.
Okay.
And they said, now bring your own car, because you aren't going to get taxis, or you're not going to get Uber up here in Bethel. You know, you got to have your own wheels.
Remember that, Hunley.
He lives there half the time. He goes down to Florida too, but I was invited to Maine. He's got a barn behind his house that's kind of the studio, and it's very, very casual. I mean, it's really, you're talking over his kitchen table, and there's a functioning kitchen back there, a lot of cameras, and it's a back and forth conversation. And he's a great interviewer. He ranks right up there with you guys.
Right on.
Tremendously interested, very quick, and intense.
I watched this. I'm urging our viewers who haven't seen it to watch the Tucker Carlson Geoff Shepard interview. Well worth the more than 2 hours.
It's almost 2.5 hours. But as of today, 5 million people have watched it.
Wow!
Or at least started to watch it. You know, have been viewers on the various websites. So it's Tucker pulls a big audience.
Yeah.
And he's convinced Nixon got robbed, but he didn't know why and how.
Right.
And that's why he was probing like mad as to what exactly was going on. And of course, I'm happy to supply it. Now,
right. Well, we've gotten into the weeds before, you and I and Eric on the first episode. So I mean, it looked like a more of a generalized take that you were explaining to Tucker. Tucker, was obviously probing, but didn't have the depth of knowledge of having read your books. I don't know if he's read them, or I don't know if he's got time.
No, and what we decided to keep that interview interesting was really not to dwell on the documents. Whereas the documentary, one of the features of the documentary is I took 5 or 6 of the most offensive documents, and we actually go through them. There's a discussion with Judge Napolitano about their importance and the aspect of it. So it's an hour and 10 minutes, and you can get a real feel. It's not the full story by any stretch of the imagination, but you can get a feel for what happened. And at the bottom of that website, we have a call to action where we're saying, look, in light of all this that's been uncovered, you got to demand the Department of Justice launch an internal investigation, and you got to demand the unsealing of certain grand jury testimony. What did the prosecutors tell the grand jurors that convinced them to name him a co-conspirator? Right. We don't think he did anything. We don't think there's anything there, but that's been secret for 50 years. So that's what we're warming up on. And this program today will help with that too. The audience that watches and gets interested, they can go to that website and be kept informed of developments.
Well, your website is, first of all, the website without the film is spectacular because there's so much information
Yes.
on your Watergate website. And I don't
Yeah.
know the full name. Maybe you could tell us the
Sure.
full,
That my personal website.
yeah, your personal website.
www.shepardonwatergate.com.
Fantastic, absolutely great website.
You
Tons of documents.
you haven't had the fun of going to law school, Mark, but in the prominent law schools and in any given course, the professor has a case book, and the case book is inevitably named after him. So it's Chadbourne on evidence, Kasner and Leach on real property, Prosser on torts. Well, I consider my website to be my digital casebook. So it's shepardonwatergate.com.
Wow.
And unlike other authors and other people that run websites, mine's not designed to get you to buy the book. You can order it. I mean, and that's where the only books are. But it's designed to share with the reader all the documents I've uncovered. The ones that are in the appendix of each of those books are reproduced on that website, so that you can see what they are. You can see they're publicly available, and it describes them. And then it describes a whole series of other things I've done that round out the Watergate story. So there's I think you could spend a lifetime reading what's on that website. I've spent a lifetime putting it together.
I've gone down that rabbit hole many a Friday night, Geoff, and spent into Saturday morning. So you're talking to the converted here. Before we get
in the description, for the website, also for the movie, and also for the 3 books, except for the 3rd book, go to the website. But Geoff's website has a link to the movie as well. You can never go too far wrong going to that. And the movie, just to let people know, is relatively inexpensive. It's I think it was like $8,
$9 to buy.
Oh, right on,
which is very affordable.
Well, you know, we want to get the word out that the idea is the widest distribution possible, because the whole effort is to bend the arc of history to show that Nixon was driven from office, that his landslide reelection was voided by these people acting above the law. The phrase at the time, no man is above the law. And all these groups in the executive branch, groups in the judicial branch, groups in the legislature, were just tossing due process aside and cheating. The judicial and prosecutorial wrongdoing is astonishing, and it's all documented.
That's why we got into the Watergate series, because of the lawfare against Trump, Geoff. That's how we have been going backwards in time to see where the origins of this came from. And I believe the lawfare comes from that time period.
Well, I think it does. The word didn't exist back then.
Right.
But when we talk about the universe was created by the Big Bang, that's when it first started. Well, lawfare first started with Watergate.
Right.
And again, I don't mean to keep harping on it. We have the documents to prove it. This isn't speculation. This isn't, maybe or whatever. These are documents they wrote.
You also point out in the 2014 book by John Dean himself, The Nixon Defense, that he kind of outs himself, right, Geoff?
Yes, that's called an admission against interest.
Wow.
And those of us who dwell in the law say, if you find one of those where somebody who's important says something that seems inconsistent with their normal story or their position, you have to pay extra attention. And out of nowhere in 2014, John publishes yet another book on Watergate called The Nixon Defense. And at page 54, there's a footnote. And the footnote says, the smoking gun has been, which drove Nixon from office, has been misunderstood from the outset. The lawyers didn't understand. They were just trying to protect the identities of 2 prominent Democrat donors to Nixon's reelection campaign. And then it says at the end, if Nixon had realized that, he might have lived to fight again another day.
Wow.
In short, the smoking gun was shooting blanks.
Wow.
And here's the guy key player in all of Watergate. And he didn't say that when he was on the stand as the lead government witness in the Watergate cover-up trial. You know, when you're sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And Haldeman's lawyer is cross-examining John Dean, the lead government witness. And Dean had told Haldeman, what we need to do to shut off this investigation is use the CIA, tell the FBI not to interview these two guys. So Haldeman knew the purpose of the move. He'd heard it from John Dean. And he's trying to get Dean to admit it on the stand. You know, wasn't this political? And Dean says, well, they were worried about Gordon Liddy's involvement, which may be true, but wasn't the complete truth. He should have admitted on the stand, you know, the trial follows Nixon's resignation. So the trial starts this October and goes through November and December.
Right.
He should have admitted on the stand that the smoking gun was misinterpreted, but he deliberately avoided that. And if you talk to anybody who knows anything about Watergate, they'll tell you, well, what drove Nixon from office was the smoking gun.
Smoking gun, yeah.
You know, it was released on August 5th. He announced his resignation on August 8th. But what they don't realize is Nixon was on the ropes well before that. He'd already his impeachment had already been recommended, and the issue at the time. Why was Nixon on the ropes? What had the prosecutors said and done that so undermined Nixon's position in the public? And that's what my research has uncovered or gotten close to, because I don't think they told the grand jurors anything when they asked them to name him a co-conspirator. I think they said, we've been giving you evidence for the last month or two. Now we're asking you to vote. But I don't think they said, here's what he did.
Right. It was kind of a legal trap, wasn't it? A kind of a nefarious legal trap to make him an unindicted co-conspirator. Right, Geoff?
Well, it was a dual trap.
A dual trap.
One, both Cox and Jaworski, the two special prosecutors, had announced publicly they would never do that. They would never name an unindicted co-conspirator because he would be deemed to have done wrong, but not be allowed to come into court to defend himself. Yeah. So they said we wouldn't do that, but their staff did it anyway. But the other
talk about the staff for a second, because you seem to describe the staff of the former Cox, the current Jaworski, as the driving the train. That these guys were in charge of the operation, and even Jaworski couldn't get around it.
You go to Elliot Richardson. He's Nixon's choice to be Attorney General. Got nothing to do with Watergate. He's clean, Mr. Clean. I need a untainted Attorney General. So Elliot doesn't want to be Attorney General. He don't want any part of it. He plans on hopes to run for president someday.
Where was he at HEW or something? Where?
Well, he was all over the place.
He was everywhere.
He started out as Undersecretary of State.
Yeah.
Then he became Secretary of HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare.
Right.
Then in the second term, he'd just been confirmed as Secretary of Defense. He had, and back in Massachusetts, he'd been Lieutenant Governor. He'd been United States Attorney. He had the perfect resume to run for president.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to get stumbled into Watergate. Watergate was a mess. So he didn't want to do it. And Nixon begged him to do it because he needed Mr. Clean.
Yeah.
Well,
he did run later, didn't he, Geoff? Didn't he try to get the nomination years later?
Well, he didn't get far if he tried.
Right.
He came back as, I think it was our ambassador for the Treaty of the Sea.
Okay.
He's a great hero because he quit in the Saturday Night Massacre.
Right.
But when he's up for confirmation, the Ted Kennedy's Judiciary Committee demands a special prosecutor and that the prosecutor operate with total and unreviewed independence from the Department of Justice. And Elliott, who's not a strong person, he's a weak individual, he agrees to everything. So we got Mr. Clean as Attorney General who wasn't involved. Then Elliott says, well, of course, I'll clear my choice for special prosecutor with a committee. And Elliott picks Ted Kennedy's favorite guy, Archibald Cox of the Harvard Law School.
Who was Carmine Bellino, Jeff?
Carmine Bellino held a dual position in the Kennedy administration. He had an office in the White House, and he had an office at the Department of Justice. He had a unique background. He was J. Edgar Hoover's personal secretary.
Right.
After that, he was Joseph Kennedy's personal secretary.
Yeah.
And he's got this wonderful Italian name. I mean, you think he's mafioso or something. Carmine Bellino. And he becomes the chief investigator for Ted Kennedy. Kennedy launched his own investigation when the Watergate indictments, the burglary indictments, were handed down, and only 7 guys were named, nobody high up in the Nixon administration. So Senator Kennedy launches his own investigation. Carmine is chief investigator. It grows, and they decide it looks too political. So Mike Mansfield, who's majority leader in the Senate, he says, we got to have other people nominally in charge, and they pick Sam Ervin. But they keep Carmine as their chief investigator. Right. So it's Kennedy's people under the name of the Ervin Committee.
Right.
And while we're on it, the Ervin Committee bears amazing parallels to the J6 Committee. Okay? Dominated by Democrats.
Right.
Nominal Republicans, but in a minority. Now, there were 3 nominal Republicans on the Ervin Committee, but Lowell Weicker, the senator from Connecticut, went on with the express intent of sinking Nixon. Nixon had no defenders on the Ervin Committee. Howard Baker, who was the lead Republican, also everybody in Washington wants to run for president someday. Howard Baker wanted to run for president, and his political antenna told him it would be better to come off as an objective searcher for truth rather than a Nixon defender. So there's that famous quote from Baker, what did the president know and when did he know it? He wasn't there to defend Nixon. He was there to polish his reputation so he could later run for office. They made a choice right at the beginning. They're only going to investigate the 1972 election, not 1968, where J. Edgar Hoover told Nixon that Lyndon Johnson had ordered him to bug Nixon's campaign plane. Right. Not 1964, where we learned that the Hoover turned over derogatory information on Goldwater's staff to the Johnson White House. And certainly not 1960, when lots of people think the election was stolen from Richard Nixon. They were only going to investigate 1972. Then they set up this special force that Richardson agreed to, the Watergate Special Prosecution Force. And the original table of organization and employment, 92 people. They didn't say that, but that's what it was. Turned out
how many lawyers out of the 92?
About 60, near as I can reconstruct.
Okay, right.
They printed the whole staff, but they didn't tell you who were lawyers.
How many lawyers did you guys have on your side?
We had just over a dozen.
Okay.
So the Ervin Committee has 30. The special prosecutor has 60. And the House Impeachment Committee has 45.
Wow.
And we have I was on the inside with Fred Bizarre, the inside lawyer. We had 1 or 2 people. The trial lawyer, the one who did the stuff in public, was Jim St. Clair, we were very fortunate to have a very prominent trial lawyer, but his staff was kind of a ragtag bunch of people who volunteered from the Department of Justice to come defend the president.
Right.
And they were good lawyers, but it wasn't a team. It wasn't a functioning group. And they did yeoman service. They were fighting off impeachment. They were fighting the tapes case. They were doing legal research on all of the other cases. It was drinking out of a fire hose.
Wow. You mentioned Barry Goldwater. I wanted to just start with Goldwater and go backwards, because Goldwater famously comes to Nixon and says
Tuesday the 6th.
Right. He comes to Nixon and says the jig is up.
Yeah, he comes with Johnny Rhodes, who's the minority leader of the House, and Hugh Scott, who's the minority leader of the Senate. So you had the two Republican leaders and Barry Goldwater, who's Mr. Conservative.
Okay, the reason I find Goldwater to be a fascinating linchpin to this thing is because, in 1964, when nobody would campaign for Goldwater, Nixon went 50 states to campaign for Goldwater.
Only guy.
The only man, Jeff. The only guy who would do it. Here he is stabbing him in the back.
Yep.
Here he is stabbing him in the back, and also wrote in his memoir that he believed Nixon was drunk on numerous occasions at these dinner parties, and Buchanan says he wasn't, in Buchanan's memoir that I've read both. But to get back to the subject today, the reason I mentioned Goldwater is because John Dean starts with Goldwater. He goes to school with Barry Goldwater's son. That's how he gets into the world, right? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, Joe.
Well, let's start there.
We'll start there. I wanted to go back because the Goldwater bookends this case.
John Dean grows up in Marion, Ohio, goes to the local high school, the Eber Baker Public High School, in his freshman year. It's 4-year high school. And in the following year, his sophomore year, his grades are undistinguished. The following year, he gets an A in choir. That's the only other. I think the others are all C's. Something happens at the beginning of his sophomore year, and suddenly he goes 400 miles away to the Stanton Military Academy in Stanton, Virginia, and he shows up on October 19th. Now, that's a very strange date to start the school year. So something happened. We don't know what it was. His roommate is Barry Goldwater's son.
Right. Barry Goldwater Jr.
Yeah. In that era, you didn't send kids to a military academy unless they were soldiers' kids, or there was a divorce, or you didn't want them around. There was, the family was not a functioning, tight unit. So you sent them off to a military school, which was a strict boarding school.
That's what happened to Oliver Stone.
John would go in the weekends to party with Barry, who's a senator's son, and in the pecking order, that's big stuff. And then he starts dating a girl who Barry Jr. was dating in the first place, Hennings, Kathy Hennings, I think.
Carla Ann Hennings.
Thank you. Carla Hennings.
Sorry. Yeah.
And she's the daughter of a senator from Missouri, who's chairman of the Senate Rules Committee. Now, he died early, so her dad has died, but this is the elite group. She goes to St. Albans Academy. John Dean comes in from Stanton. They party. Neither John nor Barry Jr. went into the military when they graduated. John goes up to Colgate, upstate New York. And then at the midway through his sophomore year, he suddenly leaves Colgate. Okay. Not at the beginning of the year, but halfway through the year. And the rumor was he was selling answers to an exam.
Oh my God.
Now, they couldn't prove it. They tried. Len Kolodny thought he could prove it.
Yeah.
What John Dean wrote
Kolodny, just to interject, Kolodny, who wrote Silent Coup.
Silent Coup. Len
Just
Kolodny,
to give a plug. Sorry. Go ahead.
who's passed away.
Passed away. His
John,
partner's still alive, though, I think.
whom?
The co-writer, I think, is still alive.
Yeah, Gatlin, Robert Gatlin.
Yeah.
Dean later said that he earned money in school writing term papers for football players.
Okay.
And you would ask him, how good a paper do you want? You want a C, you want a B, you want an A. Now, I don't know if that was at Colgate or tiny Worcester College back in Ohio. Because when John Dean leaves Colgate, he goes home. And then he's undistinguished student, graduates, and then goes to Washington and enrolls in American University in a graduate program. After earning 30 credits, he drops out and enrolls in Georgetown Law School. And then he graduates from Georgetown. And again, in distinguished grades, but he does much better his third year. Wins the prize for most improved, but of course he's starting from a low base. And then he takes a job at Welch and Morgan. Morgan and Welch.
Tell us who Welch and Morgan is. Is it prominent? Is it middle of the road?
A small boutique law firm that specializes in getting FCC communications licenses.
Which will lead to the next part of the story. Yeah.
So if you got a broadcast license, it was a license to mint money.
Yeah.
And that's what they specialized in.
Tell it to LBJ in Austin. Yeah.
And 17 million bucks. And Lyndon was always a public servant, but his wife owned all these stations.
In name only.
So John Dean is there for 6 months, figures out how this game is played, and decides he's going to submit a competing application. And the prominent owner, because again, it is all political, it's going to be Carla's mother, who's the widow of this senior senator from Missouri. So the license is going to be in St. Louis. And the law firm stumbles across his draft.
No.
And he's competing against clients of the firm.
Right.
Okay. I mean, this is outrageous. He's fired on the spot for unethical conduct. Unbelievable.
Wow.
This guy, every single school he started, high school, college, and graduate school, he switched partway through.
Because something happened.
And we don't know for sure what it was, but
something happened.
It's a spotty record. And then he gets fired from his first job. That's his only experience in private practice, 6 months with a boutique communications firm. He springs back. Only in Washington can young people spring back. He goes to work for a congressman who was also from Ohio, graduate of Worcester. And he's on the House Judiciary Committee. I can't remember his name, McCluskey, something like that. Maybe I sent it to you, but he's a strange guy. I'm told he demanded that he answer his own phone in the congressman's office, and he open and read all the mail first.
The congressman himself?
Yeah.
Oh, that's strange.
Oh, you wonder who was calling. You wonder what was in those envelopes.
Right.
But John gradually works his way up. He's minority counsel of the House Judiciary Committee. And then he's not paid any money. This congressman is cheap as hell. There are no rules for payment on the Hill.
Weird. It's anything you can work out?
Well, they give you a bulk amount, and you can spread it amongst 50 people. You can spread it amongst
I didn't know that.
Very strange. Guy's cheap as hell. So they set up
What was the National Commission on Reform of Federal
Well, that's what they set up. That legislation going through.
Okay.
National Commission on Reform of the Federal Criminal Code.
Right.
Headed by Edmund G. Pat Brown,
right,
governor of California, who defeated Nixon.
Wow.
Defeated Nixon in 1962.
Wow.
John
small world.
Small world. John builds in a position as associate director that pays $36,000 a year, triple his pay for the congressman. And so he's got to get the senator's permission, because this is a House Senate bill, to be named. So he goes and he interviews Roman Haruska, who's the Republican senator, and John McClellan, the Democrat senator, and he pledges to them he'll stay all 4 years of this study. If we put you in there, don't leave. You can count on me. Then Nixon gets elected and he goes right into the Nixon administration, just abandons that pledge to them. And
he just volunteers to write position papers for Nixon. I mean, how does he get in? How does he get in there, Geoff?
Well, because the commission was on the reform of the federal criminal code, so he didn't.
He would like that because that may help him later.
Yeah, you got it. He didn't campaign. He wrote a couple papers on reform of the federal criminal code. It's here's what we're working on. Here's a couple good ideas for you. Right. But he wasn't high up. He wasn't prominent in that. So he ends up working for the Deputy Attorney General. And there's 3 key positions under the deputy. Remember, the deputy runs the Department of Justice. The Attorney General gives speeches, consults with the president, poses for pictures. This is true of almost every cabinet department. The deputy stays put and runs the thing, chief operating officer. And he has 3 associate deputy attorneys general. One is in charge of congressional relations.
Just to interject, Attorney General is John Mitchell at this.
Absolutely true. And the deputy is Richard Kleindienst.
Right.
So he becomes head of congressional affairs for Deputy Attorney General Richard Kleindienst, because he came from the Hill.
Which would be a liaison to the Hill, Geoff?
Yeah, to the 2 committees, the 2 judiciary committees. Okay. That's what you would do.
Right.
One of the other 3 positions is head of ideas, creative concepts for law and order. And that was Don Santarelli. And there was a 3rd one whose nickname was Woody. I forget his full name. And he was working with the Bureau of Prisons and the United States attorneys. The 94 United States attorneys, and you got to ride herd on them. And that was how then there's assistant attorneys general in charge of other divisions. But John Dean was in charge of congressional affairs, not unreasonably, because he had just come off the Hill. Then over to the White House. Meanwhile, back at the White House, John Ehrlichman is the president's first lawyer, counsel to the president. And halfway through in 1970, we create the Domestic Council. The Domestic Council is the counterpart of the National Securities Council. It advises the president, staffs the president on domestic initiatives. And John Ehrlichman takes over the Domestic Council and promptly hires me as one of the first outside hires. So I have my fellowship year just ending. John hires me onto his staff. I was personally hired by John Ehrlichman, who took the rest of his staff from counsel to be with him on the Domestic Council. And then he pulls a classic bureaucratic move that blew up. He replaces himself as the president's lawyer with a demonstrably less qualified individual.
Don't tell me. Chuck Colson.
No, John Dean.
Oh, John Dean. That's terrible.
John Dean shows up. No staff, nothing to do, because all the really, really fun things went with Ehrlichman to the Domestic Council. So just to contrast, John and I started, now he came from Justice and I came from my White House Fellowship, him in July 1970, me in August 1970. He was there for 2 years. He reports to Bob Haldeman. He's there for 2 years and only saw the president one time. And that was to witness a revised will. He didn't do the will. He was just there to be one of the witnesses to sign that this was really Nixon's signature. Within a month of my arrival on the domestic council, I was the substantive expert on the president signing the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970 at the Department of Justice. It was the first time he did an official bill signing outside of the West Wing, away from the Oval Office. And I was the substance guy on that whole thing. Wow. So John was in charge of process. He told his sentencing officer that he had two responsibilities. He needed to review the full field reports on potential presidential nominees. You know, we're going to put you up as Secretary of Education. The FBI does a full field, so we know what we're dealing with. John was supposed to read those. And the second thing he was supposed to do was review pardons recommended by the pardon attorney at the Department of Justice. Now, one of the big ones was Jimmy Hoffa, and John got a book out about that. But that's all he did. He had nothing else to do, so he partied all the time. He was in Georgetown every night. By this time, he'd left his wife. He says he was thrown out, but he was partying in Georgetown. And he had no substantive meetings. So we would start up at 7 a.m. You hit the ground running. There was stuff to do. There's places to go. John would wander in at 9 or 9:30. You know, he had a maroon Porsche. I call it an entry-level Porsche. It was called a 912. I love cars. And it was called a Volkswagen with a Porsche emblem on it. It's substantially less expensive, but he loved that. And he'd brag about his car. Now, just to get personal stories, because he's down the hall. I had, at the time, this gorgeous Jaguar. Okay? Now, it was 20 years old. It was a 1955 XK140 drophead coupe. And this is the predecessor of the E-Jag. Beautiful rolling fenders, just prettiest car you could pick.
The audience should keep in mind that you're from California.
I am from California. I grew up working on cars.
Okay.
I had restored this car from the junkyard. Been in an accident.
Right.
And I spent years. My mother says she remembers me best under the car.
The hood, under the hood.
So I have my car. And John says, well, shoot, you may think you got a special car. Let's go race. Okay. Now, at the time, the Dulles Airport was out in the hinterlands, and they built a special highway just to get to Dulles. It was called the Dulles Access Road, and there were no entrances or exits until you got to the airport. I mean, that was the only purpose of that road. So he says, let's go out. We were at a cocktail reception or something. I really didn't like him. He says, let's go out on the Dulles Access Road with who's fastest, you know? And I said, John, my car's 20 years old, and that race has already been run because my model won the 24-hour Le Mans race all 3 years of its manufacture. Well, he just, you know, he didn't like that. And I was in charge of a project, a law and order project. And John Dean was supposed to help, and he didn't do a thing. And I went into my boss, who was in between me and John Ehrlichman, a guy named Bud Krogh, head plumber, becomes the head plumber. And I said, I don't want to work with Dean anymore. He won't work. He's just partying all the time. And he said, John's super sensitive of his position here on the staff. So you're younger. It would be better if you let me deal with John. And he won't be on your projects anymore. Well, John repaid that favor because he encouraged Bud Krogh to perjure himself before the grand jury in the plumbers trial, which Bud did, and he pled guilty, but he got convicted and sent to Allenwood for 6 months. So that was just, and I mentioned it to him years later. He was going on about how he'd done the right thing and he pled guilty. And I said, Bud, you were indicted for perjury. And he said, well, yeah, but John Dean and I walked around the ellipse lots of times, and John said, "You got to lie. You got to lie like you've never lied before." And I said, "Did he tell you he was at risk of prosecution if you didn't lie?" And I got this look like a deer in the headlights. This was, probably 30 years after Watergate.
Wow.
And he, for the first time, it dawned on him that Dean had screwed him.
Wow.
And Dean screwed a lot of people.
Well, did Crow hire Liddy? Is that how
Yeah.
Is that how the plumbers unit begins to be formed? Because Ehrlichman bails out and turns the whole thing over to Crow?
Let's start back.
Okay.
Bud came with John to the White House.
They're sewn together at the hip, these two guys.
Well,
right?
he lived with his family.
Yeah.
Worked for his law firm.
Yeah.
He was the favored son. Now, we have rules against nepotism. He was not legally his son, but he was treated as his son. Wow. He'd be over at the Ehrlichmans having dinner, that sort of thing. Yeah. So Bud could do anything he wanted. He was very talented.
Yeah.
But he had the absolute assurance of John's support on anything.
Mm-hmm.
He decided he wanted to hire Gordon Liddy. Gordon was being fired from the Treasury for refusal to follow instructions. It had to do with gun issues. Gordon reported to the Assistant Secretary of Treasury for Enforcement, and he supervised customs, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and the Secret Service at that time. Gordon fancied himself the gun owner's friend and would go to conventions and give speeches against alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And they said, "You got to stop this. That's a federal agency that reports to your boss." And he wouldn't listen. So they fired him. And Bud became convinced that he needed to hire Gordon.
Why, though? I never understood why.
Remember
of all the people on the earth, he's got to pick this guy.
Well, you remember I told you there were 3 associate deputy attorneys general.
Yeah.
Okay. The middle guy, the idea guy, was a guy named Don Santarelli. And Don and Gordon were good friends. And Gordon would tell Don all the mess ups at Treasury. And the Department of Justice law enforcement is competing with the Department of Treasury law enforcement, particularly on drugs, because of customs and the Bureau of Alcohol and Dangerous Drugs. So Santarelli says he's being fired, but he's really loyal to the White House, meaning he's loyal to me. And so Bud hires him. And I was adamant we shouldn't do it. I thought Gordon was nuts. And I knew he was being fired from the Treasury. And I made such a stink.
Well, just to interject, Tucker seems to love him in your...
Yeah, we'll get to that. Remind me.
We'll get to that. Okay, sorry.
So Bud said, "I'll tell you what. You and I will go across the street to Noni's Cafe. We'll have a cup of coffee, and you'll have an uninterrupted half hour to make your case against Gordon Liddy." So he gave me the time, and then he made the opposite decision and hired Gordon. And shortly thereafter, the Pentagon Papers leaked. They set up the unit within the White House called the Plumbers, and Bud assigned Gordon to be the chief operating officer of the Plumbers.
Well, Geoff, just to interject, I've made the case that this whole thing begins because of the Pentagon Papers.
Absolutely.
Am I correct in this assumption?
No question in my mind.
In my mind, right.
Other people, the uninitiated, tourists who wander through public affairs, they may not appreciate it, but it was the leak of the Pentagon Papers that planted the seeds that blossomed into Watergate.
How much of an earthquake in the Oval Office and in the White House and the West Wing was the leaking of the Pentagon Papers?
Well, it was huge. It was considered to be the greatest national security leak in the Cold War.
Yeah.
And what it was a secret, unreviewed study done by the 3 top anti-war officers at the Pentagon Paul Warnke, Mort Halpern, and Les Gelb.
Now, Les Gelb was also a New York Times
Yeah,
editorial.
he's a writer.
Yeah.
He's a writer.
Okay.
So what it did, it went all the way back to World War II, and it built the case that we had no legitimate reason to be in the Vietnam War. It was written by the Doves. The National Security Council didn't know it existed. The Department of State had never seen it. It wasn't peer reviewed. Daniel Ellsberg was a hawk in the Marines, switched to become a Dove, had worked on the Pentagon Papers, and he was trying to leak them to hurry along the anti-war movement.
Didn't he take them to Fulbright at one point trying to?
Yep. Now, remember, it stopped with Lyndon Johnson. Nixon was not at risk.
Yeah.
He peddled him he tried peddling him for a year, and Fulbright wouldn't touch him.
Right.
Chairman of Senate Foreign Relations. He said, you send them to me officially, and I'll deal with them, but I don't want to touch them. They're classified top secret. And the way Gordon explained it years later was they would say, this event happened or that event happened, and they'd cite an internal memo, classified. And in the study, 48 notebooks, the last notebook contained all the documents that were referred to in the rest of the text. Well, if you had electronic communications picked up from the U.S. Embassy in Vietnam, and they transmitted a document, and now you had the document, you could break the code.
Yeah.
And they had to change every code worldwide because.
Well, let me ask something. There was a rumor, I don't know if it was from Kissinger, that Ellsberg had walked it into the Soviet embassy.
Not quite, but damn close.
Okay. All right.
They were told, it's in the notes of their meeting. The FBI said a copy had been delivered to the Soviet embassy. Not necessarily by Ellsberg. A copy had been delivered to the Soviet embassy. Now, they fight over whether it turned out to be true or not.
Yeah.
But there's no question that's what they were told. So,
why does it end up in the Brookings Institute safe that they want to go into the Brookings Institute, burn it down or whatever? I mean, what is it about this thing that there's only one copy?
Well, they didn't finish the study by the time Nixon got inaugurated. So they say Robert McNamara authorized the study. Well, you walk down the hallway and you say, Bob, we ought to go find out how we got into this thing. So we don't do it again. And they consider that to be their permission. There's nothing in writing that I've ever found that says, go do this study or defines what they're supposed to do. They do the study. Now, it's posted on the National Archives website. You can go read the Pentagon Papers, 48 volumes.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, there's an executive summary. And I'm told all the summaries were written by Les Gelb. If you go through it and you print out the summaries, you'll end up with about an inch high stack of paper. Okay. That's what you want to read.
Right.
And it's all over the ground because different Pentagon officers are writing different sections. Here's World War II. Here's the initial division between South and North. Here's the Geneva Accords. Here's what we said before the Geneva Accords. Here's the Geneva Accords. Here's why we didn't sign them. And depending on whether the writer liked the president or the Secretary of Defense, it's sympathetic or it's critical. They liked Ike. So that's pretty mundane. They liked Jack Kennedy. So he doesn't have any blame at all. And they really threw Lyndon under the bus. And you can see that and it's changing as Gelb writes these summaries. So they weren't through. Clark Clifford had become Secretary of Defense. So they write this letter on January, probably 19th, because the presidency changes on the 20th of January. Nixon's inaugurated. Says, here's the study, okay, to the Secretary of Defense, to Clifford. Except it's not done. It's only 36 volumes. So Les Gelb and Paul Warnke take the 36 volumes and the project to Brookings. And for 6 months, they're official officers of the Nixon administration. And Warnke may leave, but he still works on this.
Yeah.
And they do it at Brookings. Okay. And then it's transferred out to Rand out in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And that's where Ellsberg starts making copies.
Right. Right. Now he's working at Rand here in Santa Monica.
He's a consultant here, gets transferred out there.
Yeah. Okay.
I think he takes the study with him.
That's what I'm just wondering about the physics of it because.
Yeah, but here's what's cute.
Go ahead.
If you are a defense contractor, a think tank, you have in your possession classified documents because you're studying them. Okay. The government takes classification very seriously. Civilians don't seem to understand that, but the military, loose lips sink ships. People get fired. People get prosecuted for improper treatment of classified documents. So on the top secrets, you got to check them out. You got to check them in. You got to account for where they spent the night. Really serious stuff. One of the ideas is let's go to Brookings. This is one of the Liddy's crazy ideas.
That's what I was getting at.
Let's fake a fire.
Yeah.
We'll go with the fire department.
Right.
We'll go break into Brookings, open the safe, and we'll steal the documents, and we'll have them. We'll have them cold. And then the article that makes fun of this says, oh, and by the way, there's no safe at Brookings. But that's ludicrous. They had to have a secured location for their government documents. Open and shut.
A skiff of types.
Yeah. Well, now whether it's a legal safe or a secured room is irrelevant.
Yeah.
There had to be, because they were a defense contractor.
Yeah.
Eminently secured place where documents would handle. In any event, the study and the study that leaks, they made 3 or 4 copies. One is with the Secretary of Defense. Mel Laird learns he has a copy. One is at Brookings. One is at
Rand.
Yeah. And parts of one end up with the New York Times.
Yeah.
So huge turmoil. We said, not me. I'm a domestic guy. Look, Dick, this stops with Johnson. This is just not your problem. And Kissinger went in and said, I am negotiating with 3 totalitarian regimes: North Vietnam, Soviet Union, China. If they think we can't keep secrets, they won't talk. You've got to stop this. Your presidency is at risk. So Nixon gets all geared up, and they decide to launch this internal unit. And they pick my boss, Bud Krogh, to run it. And he gets a personal meeting with the president. Now, he's 31, 32, into the Oval Office, and the president is pounding his desk. You've got to stop these leaks. So they start holding meetings in the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing. And they bring the CIA and the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice, and they're hammering them like mad. I mean, viciously hammering them.
Wow.
And they get the CIA to try to prepare. They learn that Ellsberg's got a shrink, that he used to go to a shrink. His ex-wife says he used to go there all the time. They think maybe Ellsberg told the shrink what he was going to do with the rest of the papers.
Let's just back up for a second to the Tom Houston plan.
Yeah.
Is that a precursor to the plumbers unit?
Yeah. The Houston plan is, according to the later Church Committee, which has a paragraph on it.
Yeah.
It is the update of an existing plan of what to do if there is sufficient turmoil that we can't hold an election. How do we enforce martial law?
Right.
And Tom's job is to, go to the agencies, talk about what we're going to do.
Right.
And they end up with a group the graybeards, who can authorize the FBI to do black bag jobs.
Right.
And it's signed off, and then Hoover has second thoughts.
Right.
After a week, just a week.
Right.
And he says, this isn't going to work. I'm not having a committee tell me what to do when I'm going to take the fall if it gets screwed up. So he goes to Mitchell. Mitchell goes to Nixon, and the plan is ended.
Which leads to the plumbers plan, because Hoover doesn't have their back.
Houston's gone.
Yeah.
This is a new initiative under Bud Krogh.
Right.
And the National Security Council produces Henry's guy, David Young. David's job is to declassify information from previous presidents. Nixon is really upset. They're all over him for making foreign affairs decisions when he knows Kennedy and Johnson did far worse. That stuff's still classified. Go back to the missile gap in the 1962 campaign. Nixon's vice president. He knows there's no missile gap, but he can't say it
because of the security.
Because he's vice president. So Kennedy has a ball, and then Kennedy gets elected, and the gap disappears. Well, this is something like that same thing. They wanted David to specialize on declassification, Bud to specialize on stopping leaks. So Bud hires or assigns Gordon Liddy. Gordon Liddy brings on his best friend, Howard Hunt, and the two of them run the plumbers.
Now, the CIA, just to get to the plumbers, when he's making his gemstone presentation to Mitchell.
No, you're jumping too far ahead.
Okay, let's go backwards. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Liddy gets hired, and he works for the plumbers. Okay. They think the shrink may have an idea of what Ellsberg's going to do. The CIA is asked to prepare a psychological profile on Ellsberg. They consult with a shrink. For some reason, he's hung up on privacy. He won't help.
You're talking about Dr. Fielding out here in Beverly Hills.
Yeah, Dr. Lewis Fielding.
Dr. Lewis Fielding.
Ellsberg's former shrink.
Right.
He won't talk to the government. He's talking patient privacy. That's okay. So they decide that they'll go break in and read his files on Ellsberg. And they go to Ehrlichman, and they have a meeting saying, here's where we are, and we're thinking of a covert operation. Look at his files. And they put in a memo. They meet with him on August 5th. They put in a memo on August 8th. And one of the choices is a covert operation to inspect Fielding's files. And Ehrlichman puts an E for Ehrlichman in approve. And he writes, as long as it can't be traced to us. So they got permission to do a covert operation. Now,
I have a question. If it's based on the laws of the time, wiretapping and break-ins for national security purposes are considered legal, Geoff?
Well, that depends, Mark.
Okay.
Who you want to talk to?
Okay, well, I'm talking to you.
Give me just a second. So
okay. All right, Bobby.
I can finish covert. Okay?
Go ahead, covert. Go ahead.
Hold the thought.
Go ahead.
They come out, they get the memo back saying, go ahead. And they say to Gordon Liddy and to Howard Hunt, they've tried the FBI. The FBI won't do it. Okay. Because Daniel Ellsberg's father-in-law is Leonard Marks. Leonard Marks runs a toy company. He gives toys at Christmas to Hoover, make Hoover a hero. So Hoover won't touch it. So they say, well, we'll do it ourselves. Brilliant idea. Howard Hunt is CIA. Gordon Liddy is former FBI. He says, I used to do these for Hoover. I know how this is done. And they come out and they say, but it can't be traced to us. So after they get Ehrlichman's permission, Howard Hunt says, and there's Liddy in the background and there's Hunt in the foreground. Hunt says, I know some people who could do this for us. See, back when we were training Cubans to do the Bay of Pigs, the invasion of Cuba, I was the mysterious Eduardo, who had the money and the plans for the invasion. we tell them something to do with Castro has to do with that shrink, and they'll do it in a nanosecond. So 4 Cubans go out to Beverly Hills to do a covert search of Fielding's files. They can't pick the lock. So rather than have a failed mission, Liddy says, break in, make it look like a drug bust, scatter files all over the floors. They do. They don't find Ellsberg's file. It was a failed mission. But
no,
nobody.
That's disputed, by the way. That is disputed.
Nobody. Yeah, I know. We don't have time to do that.
No, I'm just saying. Go on.
Many conspiracy.
Go on. I just have to interject an asterisk. Go ahead.
They come back, didn't find anything, and now they want to go break into Ellsberg's apartment, to Fielding's apartment. And Ehrlichman says, "Wait a second. I approved a covert operation, not a break-in. Get rid of Gordon Liddy. Get him off the staff." So that's when your friend John Dean is assigned the responsibility of preparing a campaign intelligence plan. Now, those words sound pretty innocent.
Right.
Campaign intelligence plan. It's a spy operation. Every campaign has one. Today, they'd call it opposition research.
Would this be the same as Dirty Tricks with Segretti?
No, that's a different part.
Okay, all right, just to delineate.
We had the Democrat candidate for president just pick a vice president. There were 6 or 8 possibilities. The GOP was researching everything they could on those 6 or 8 possibilities, finding out everything they could about that person. We assume they did it legally. What are their policy positions? Where's their money coming from? Where do they plan their campaign stops? Are there anything embarrassing in their files? Now, we may have someone volunteer to be a campaign driver, and that driver could give us the night before the printout of where they're going to be the next day, who's going to be where. We could go organize a protest because we know where they're going. But John Dean picks Gordon Liddy to fill out this campaign intelligence plan. Why did he pick Liddy? Well, he has other people in mind, but they're not available. They're busy. Bud Krogh says...
Just to interject, you're talking about Tony Ulazowitz and Jack Caulfield, 2 ex-New York City detectives.
Yes, I'm talking about Caulfield.
And I think Ulazowitz was also...
but not in on this particular
case. Okay, go on.
They go to Caulfield first, and Caulfield says, I'm going to develop a outside organization. I'll leave the staff. And it's called Operation Sandwedge. And they'll do the spying. They'll do legally, but they'll do the intelligence gathering. And they decide Caulfield's not the man for the job. So they assign it to Dean. Dean goes to see Krogh, and he wants David Young to do the operation. And Krogh says, I can't spare David Young. He's too busy. How about my man Gordon? Gordon has shown that he can handle significant problems. So Dean, in his book, says, I interviewed Gordon. Gordon was well laid out. He had this Glen plaid suit with a vest. He looked pretty good in it, you know. I mean, I'm the only one that knows he's nuts. Nobody else seems to see it. You know about the candle trick?
Oh, yeah.
You know, they go.
Hey, I went to Bard College where he was assistant DA, Jeff. Well, so I know all about Liddy's backstory, bro.
They went to reconnoiter the Fielding break-in, and they try to recruit the waitress in the bar to do something. And she says, listen, if you get caught, you'll sell me out in a nanosecond. Gordon says, you have no idea how tough I am. Holds his hand over the candle till the hand burns.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, you may think that's an apocryphal story, but I was there in the White House when Liddy came to work that Monday morning, and his hand's all bandaged in white cloth.
Oh, no.
And I said, well, Gordon, what's wrong with your hand? You know, Gordon. He says, Geoff, I did the dumbest thing.
Oh.
I was lighting my pipe and looking at a pretty girl, and I was tamping it with a book of matches, and the matches caught on fire. Isn't that a dumb thing to do? You know, I have nightmares over Gordon Liddy. So Gordon shows up at the re-election committee. He's been promised $500,000. He's been recruited by John Dean.
Is it $1 million or $500,000, Geoff?
$500,000 promised, up to $1 million possible.
Okay. All right.
The acting chief of staff is a guy named Jeb Magruder.
Right.
And Magruder, dumb ass Magruder, says, well, there's nobody here with a budget authority to approve $1 million expenditure. The only guy that can do that is John Mitchell, but he hasn't arrived yet. He's over at the Attorney General's office.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to go over there to get his permission. So on January 27th, 1972, Gordon Liddy, John Dean, Jeb Magruder meet with Attorney General John Mitchell.
Just give the audience a sense of where Jeb Magruder came from before this job.
Well, Jeb is classic lightweight, a yes man, a smile. He's in the communications unit. He's hired after Nixon is inaugurated by Nixon's, recommended by Nixon's kitchen cabinet out in LA. And his job is to backstop Herb Klein in the communications section to see if they can get more positive stories about Nixon.
Okay.
It's a fool's errand. I mean, you can't do that. You're not going to get positive stories. And Jeb is inept.
Right.
So when Chuck Colson, that you mentioned, takes over the communications function, they say, well, now Jeb will be reporting to you. Herb Klein retires. Chuck takes it over.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck says, I don't want him working for me.
Mm-hmm.
Send him over to the re-election committee.
Mm-hmm.
He can't do any harm over there.
Yeah.
So Jeb shows up.
Yeah.
The people who started, that's not Jeb, that's Steve Bull.
Regarding, I don't know about this photo, but regarding Liddy and Magruder, did Liddy despise Magruder? I understand that.
Kill him.
Didn't he offer to kill him or something? Okay.
Yeah. When Liddy was at Treasury,
right,
his boss was Assistant Treasury Secretary Gene Rosides. And Liddy concluded he was stupid and wouldn't do what he said. That's why he got fired.
Right.
Liddy gets over to CREEP, the Committee for the Re-election of the President, and concludes rightly that Magruder's nuts. Not nuts, but a weakling and not willing to do aggressive stuff. So,
didn't he come from ladies' hosiery or perfume or as a salesperson?
Well, he might have been in advertising before he got there.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
So was Bob Haldeman. Bob Haldeman worked for J. Walter Thompson.
Good point.
There were some pretty heavy guys.
Yeah.
That came out of J. Walter Thompson.
That's right.
Apparently, at one point, Magruder put his arm on Liddy's shoulder and said, well, now, Gordon, you know, we all got to get along. And Liddy said, take your arm off or I'll kill you. And he meant it. And Magruder was physically afraid of Gordon Liddy. Rightfully so. Liddy was nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And he tried to get him fired. And John Dean and Gordon Strawn, I'm told, said, now don't let personalities get involved. We'll switch Liddy to be the lawyer for the Finance Committee. So he's general counsel to the Finance Committee, and he'll take the campaign intelligence plan with him. So Liddy constructs his plan. He's ready for approval. He has the CIA prepare the big charts that describe.
Explain that to me, because I've never been able to get my mind around this.
Well, the plan is
without Hunt. How does he get that done?
When they set up the plumbers operation, John Ehrlichman called Dick Helms at the CIA and said, help him out.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So,
and the CIA gave them a camera when they went out to reconnoiter.
Yeah.
The break-in, the film could only be developed by the CIA, could only open the camera. So The CIA knows all about the intelligence plan. Nixon knows nothing. Never been shown that Gordon Liddy ever met with or talked with Ehrlichman or Haldeman or Nixon. But those guys at that meeting, those four, okay, Gordon Liddy, Jeb Magruder, John Dean, and John Mitchell, when the burglars were caught red-handed months later, they were at risk of prosecution because they knew about the plan. Okay, it wasn't approved at that meeting. There was a second meeting on February 6th. It wasn't approved there either, but they knew what the plan was. Now, your viewers may be curious about the plan. Specific proposals for mugging, bugging, kidnapping, and prostitution.
I've always said mugging, bugging, and drugging as the three.
Well, give me just a second. We're going to it. Gordon is so in love with his proposal that years later, when he wrote his autobiography called Will, the autobiography of Gordon Liddy, he describes the plan in loving detail.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt what was in that plan. Now, they were going to bug the headquarters and the candidates. They were worried about the Republican National Convention, which was scheduled for San Diego. The Sheraton had just built a new hotel, and the deal was, we'll give you $200,000 toward the campaign if your headquarters are at the Sheraton. Oh, and by the way, we have an antitrust suit, and we'd like that to go away.
Oh,
yeah. So that's a separate lawsuit. We aren't going to go there. Okay?
Yeah.
There were going to be demonstrations, just like we know there are going to be demonstrations in Chicago.
Hopefully.
Gordon was ready. We're going to kidnap the ringleaders of the demonstrations, and we're going to take them down into the hinterlands of Mexico. And by the time they make it back across the border, if at all, the convention will be over. Okay? That's mugging and kidnapping.
Mm-hmm.
Prostitution, separate category.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have houseboats off the hotel, the main hotel, the Fontainebleau, down in Miami. And we will get them to seduce senior Democrat operatives, and we'll learn all about their plans for the campaign. Not just everyday prostitutes, high-toned prostitutes. And Magruder says, I'd be happy to try them out. I mean, just, Okay, now what did I ask you to hold the thought on?
Magruder, we've covered.
Well, I got to connect up.
Okay.
Remember, the Fielding break-in occurs, there's a police report, but nobody gets caught. Nobody cares.
Right.
Except it's that same exact group that does the Watergate break-in.
Right.
Now, we know people at the campaign are in deep trouble, okay, because they knew. But nobody on the White House staff knew. At the moment of break-in, they were clean. Their problem was it was the same group. Now, the uninitiated say, well, they moved the plumbers over to the re-election. That's not true. They fired Liddy, and the plumbers kept operating. Dave.
You're talking about McCord and
no, the deregulation guy, David. You showed his picture. Neat guy.
Deregulation guy.
Young. David Young.
David Young.
I'm in my 80th year, just like Biden.
Was he an aide to Kissinger, David Young?
Yeah.
Was he?
Yes,
okay. Just so we're talking about the same guy.
Kissinger went through staff.
Yeah.
He was Kissinger's aide de camp.
Right.
Todd Holland was Ehrlichman's. Larry Higby was Haldeman's.
Where does Haig fit in on this thing? Is Young also working with Haig?
He's on the NSC when Haig is on the NSC.
Yeah.
Young's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
He has a very, very uncomplimentary view of Haig.
That's that I'd like to read. Does he have a book? Does he have a book at all?
I'm told he believes Haig helped set up the military spy ring.
I happen to agree with that, so I'd like to read
now,
more about that.
Let's take another diversion, and we'll talk for a moment about the military spy ring.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the spy ring.
Pentagon became very concerned about Nixon because Nixon is announcing troop withdrawals from the Vietnam War. He's consorting with our two mortal enemies, Russia and China, and he's talking it over with this liberal Harvard professor named Henry Kissinger, and they've cut the military out. They don't even know about the withdrawals that are announced. So they decide they better figure out what's going on, and they set up a spy ring. And they have this guy named Yeoman. He's a yeoman.
Radford.
Yeoman Radford, who takes and surreptitiously copies what they think ultimately total 5,000 classified documents. And they go through Admiral Wellender over to Admiral Moore, who's chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And, Haig is deputy national security director under Kissinger, but he's not in those afternoon meetings in the hideaway office when Nixon and Kissinger are debating the future of the free world. So I'm told I have no involvement.
Well, let me just ask you this. Was Woodward briefing General Haig from the Pentagon? They both deny it.
I have read that on one or two occasions, Woodward came from the Pentagon and did classified intelligence briefings for the National Security Council.
Okay.
Probably in the Situation Room.
Okay.
And that while he was seated outside, next to him was the deputy director of the FBI, Mark Felt. That's where their friendship blossomed. So later during Watergate, Woodward is getting information from Felt on
they've met on these occasions when he's briefing.
On at least one, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if they were there together, but it's very clear that Woodward's insights into the investigation came from memos that Felt was giving him. Okay? It's very clear that John Dean's information on the cover-up and how we were defending ourselves from the FBI investigation came from 81 investigative summaries that Pat Gray gave to John Dean. So you've got secret memos improperly conveyed to two different major players in Watergate. Now, we got to go back to Dean, but let me finish.
I want to go back to Dean because for his crimes of embezzlement of the 4,000.
We'll get there.
Go ahead.
I just want to do this triangle for your viewers. To understand Watergate, you got to picture a triangle with each corner representing a branch of the government, executive, judicial, legislative. What has come to light is there was a secret cabal of individuals within those three branches who were orchestrating Nixon's demise. The two special prosecutors, Archie Cox and Leon Jaworski, were meeting with the judges and meeting with Hill staff and their associates in the Watergate Special Prosecution Force were meeting with the judges, meeting with the Hill staff. The judges, and there are three of them, Judge Sirica, who appointed himself to preside over the Watergate trials, Judge Gazelle, whom Sirica appointed to preside over the plumbers trials, and the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, who stacked the deck on the appeals so that Sirica would never be overruled. What we learned later is, and it's in the documentary, is that Archie Cox became so worried that they would win at trial because Sirica was so biased, but lose on appeal because of all these violations of due process, that he privately called on David Bazelon, the chief judge, and urged him to stack the deck on appeals, which Bazelon did. Okay? It's perfectly clear from the judges that are on the panels Yeah, our friend David Bazelon. The only problem with this great idea is the law clerk was in the room when Cox did his pitch. A guy named Ronald Carr. Years later, Ronald Carr told one guy who happened to be being sworn in to be a judge on the D.C. Circuit. And that judge told me. And I was after him for years to say that publicly. And in 2021, just 3 weeks before he died, he said so publicly on film at a Federalist Society seminar.
Right on.
And he describes just what I told you.
Right on.
That Cox went and called on the chief judge. Then go over to the legislature, the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Senate Irvin Committee, and the House Judiciary Committee are meeting with the prosecutors all the time, meeting with the judges. It was just incredible. And just to finish it off, they're so proud of what they did. They wrote memos about what they were doing. And those memos began to surface in 2013. I found them. I'm the first person to see them. That's what my last 2 books are about. That's what my website is about. All these documents are there for public review. So this is not hypothetical.
No.
It is not, do you think the CIA did this or did that? This is written proof of the wrongdoing.
Now, do you, in your film, do you mention the dissent by Judge McKinnon, Geoff?
No, I don't in the film, because the film has an hour.
Right.
We mention.
Can you mention to the audience just who Judge McKinnon was?
Yeah, well, Judge McKinnon is a Republican appointee to the D.C. Circuit.
Yeah.
He's outmanned and outgunned because he's in the minority.
Right.
The first trick is to bounce Sirica off the case.
Yeah.
The indictments are named. He names himself to preside over the trial, and the defense lawyers go crazy and appeal that. And that's the first instance where the deck is stacked on the appeal, where there's no opportunity for oral argument. There's no opinion. It's a one sentence per unsigned opinion that says motion denied. And it's a big surprise to McKinnon. He didn't even know they were going to have all judges. And then he writes this dissent, fiery dissent, saying you can't do this. And the dissent comes out a month later, and the top lawyer in the special prosecutor's office says, I just read the dissent, and that's powerful. The effort to recuse Sirica, that's got legs. We should, and he actually puts in writing, we should never have let Sirica name himself to preside over the trial. I got that memo.
Wow.
I mean,
that's a great memo. That's a great memo.
That is a huge memo.
Briefly, if we can get into the roadmap and maybe a little bit about who George Frampton was, Geoff, and the Frampton supposition.
Yes.
Because this is your bailiwick. If we just explain the roadmap to the tourists who are watching.
This can go on forever, Mark.
No, we're going to have you back again because there's too much here. There's too much.
They gather all kinds of grand jury evidence they think they could use to indict President Nixon. The difficulty is the law is unclear as to whether a sitting president can be indicted. It's unclear today because nobody's tried it. The Department of Justice has said you can't, don't bother. But there's a secret meeting between Jaworski and Sirica, and they agree you should really follow the impeachment path, not the indictment path. And then the prosecutors are left with this terrible problem. They've got all this grand jury evidence that has to be kept secret forever by law. They want to deliver to the Hill to be used for political purposes. And the lead lawyer comes up with this brilliant idea to call it a presentment, and that will enable them to get around the grand jury secrecy laws. It's not a report, but they decide they need to warn Sirica first. So there's a memo that says we need to go meet with him in secret about a ruling that's going to come before him for certain, but we'll go see him alone. And then they do the meeting and they go see him alone. and they convince him. And the author of the first memo is right. Sirica's worried as he can be. He didn't want to do this, but they talk him into it. So on March 1st, when the indictments are handed down, there's this surprise presentment and briefcase. And the defense lawyers don't know anything about it. And it's so complicated that day of doing everything in order. Jaworski goes in and rehearses it with Sirica in his chambers beforehand in another totally improper ex parte meeting. So then Sirica unseals the roadmap, reseals it, and decides we're going to send it up to the Hill. But the secret of this is it's sealed. So Nixon's defense lawyers, none of the lawyers, know what's in the roadmap. Now, it's nicknamed the roadmap because it's alleged it will lead directly to Nixon's impeachment. We got the proof. We just can't show it to you because it's sealed under the grand jury.
How convenient.
So until 45 years ago, the roadmap was secret. And then in response to my court petition, it was unsealed. And we learned for the first time in 45 years what Nixon had been accused of doing by the special prosecutor. Now, what's cute, and it's posted. It's posted on the National Archives website.
Yeah.
Right up there at the top. In red, bold red, it says unsealed by order of the chief judge on October 11th, 2018. And then it cites my petition, which is the reason it was unsealed. Now, the difficulty is the roadmap was a little vague. What Sirica said in approving the format, no conclusions, no opinions. It's got to be straight facts. You state the fact. Geoff Shepard was interviewed by Mark Groubert on this date, and then under the line, his grand jury testimony. Okay? So the actual roadmap is an outline.
It's an outline. Yeah.
55 pages.
55 pages, yeah.
Unsealed in 2018. But all the citations, they're either White House transcripts or grand jury testimony or something else. They're unsealed too, and they print out to be about 2 reams of paper.
Right.
Okay. Now, nobody would read that stuff. They'd take the factual assertion for real. But when they get around to Nixon and accusing Nixon of specific wrongdoing, they don't have the proof, so they fake it. And I uncovered the fakery. And in my third book, The Nixon Conspiracy, we show and walk through the fakery. Now, that's right. The Hill staff didn't understand the roadmap. So they write a separate memo, the Nixon prosecutive memo, and draft number 2, dated June 28th, 1974, happen to have a copy. They share with the House inquiry staff, the impeachment inquiry staff, and meet with them on a series of meetings to describe what they have against the president. And once you have that, you can see they finessed it, they faked it, they didn't have the proof.
Right. Well, I just want to get back to Sirica and Dean and his prison time, so we can close out with John Dean and how he's sent to. I thought he was where Colson was sent, was the prison in Montgomery.
Fort Halliburton. No. This is
before that. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's already sentenced, Geoff, and then Sirica will.
You got to go back a little bit further, Mark.
Okay.
Dean testifies in a totally separate trial in New York called the Vesco trial, Robert Vesco. And it's an indictment against John Mitchell and Maurice Stans, the finance committee, that Vesco gave money to buy out of some problem. Dean is a principal witness. The guys are acquitted, outright acquitted. And the jurors are interviewed by the press, and they say, we didn't believe John Dean.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it because it's out of the D.C. circuit and in a normal place like New York?
65 cases brought within the D.C. circuit.
Yeah.
Where the jury is so biased and so tainted, the jury pool, you couldn't get a fair jury.
Right.
They won 63 of the 65.
Right.
There's 6 cases brought outside the district. They won half and lost half.
Okay.
They lost the Vesco case in New York.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Trump didn't lose the case in Manhattan, but they lost Vesco.
So Dean is being shipped around to be the.
Well, he was the lead. He was a principal witness in New York.
Right.
So Sirica and the prosecutors decide they've got to increase his witness credibility. So out of nowhere, they call him in, I think in August of 74, and they sentence him to 1 to 4 years in prison with incarceration to begin the first day of the trial, the cover-up trial. So John Dean can come into the cover-up trial and say, I've been punished.
Mm-hmm.
These are my colleagues. I tell you, they were in on it.
Mm-hmm.
You should punish them too.
And
he's the lead-off witness.
Yeah.
And they try to say you're just currying favor because you think they're going to let you off. Sirica interrupts the opening statement, demands the defense lawyer come to the bench. Don't you do that. He's been sentenced. You cannot question his sentence.
Wow.
The guys are convicted on all counts.
Wow.
Okay? January 1st, 3-month trial. January 1st, 1975. Within a week, on his own motion, Sirica calls John Dean in, reduces the sentence to time served. John Dean has been technically incarcerated for less than 4 months, but he never spent a night in jail.
Wow.
Okay? He was at a witness holding facility at Fort Holabird, Maryland.
Yeah.
It's like living in the barracks. He's got his own bedroom. He's got his own office. He has conjugal visits.
Oh, my God.
It's unbelievable.
Wow.
So, in the great scheme of things, there's 2 real criminals in Watergate.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon Liddy plans it, spent 5 years in jail. 5 years in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Smoothed him out. Tucker remembers him from after he got out.
Yeah.
He was much smoother. I remember him from before he went in.
Right.
John Dean is the other criminal. He's called by the FBI the mastermind of the Watergate cover-up.
Yeah.
The FBI agent who led the whole investigation said John Dean was responsible for 95% of the cover-up.
And he's in your film.
That quote is in my film.
Okay.
He gives it to an archivist in an oral history. John Dean is disbarred. February 6th, 1974 in Virginia. Mm-hmm. He's accused. The bar comes in and says he's guilty of 4 things. Suborning perjury, causing other people to lie.
Right on.
Destroying evidence, taken from Howard Hunt safe.
Right.
Embezzling $4,000 for his honeymoon.
That was worth it.
Giving government documents, the investigatory documents, to defense counsel.
Right.
Okay. He has been disbarred from the practice of law and cannot represent any client going to any court anywhere in the United States since February 6, 1974. And yet they introduce him as the president's lawyer. He's a convicted felon, disbarred from the practice of law, the central evildoer of Watergate, the arch villain, never spent a night in jail. And the public is told he's an innocent whistleblower.
I suggest there's a third criminal, and that is Judge John Sirica, who I'd like you to come back and just do an episode with us on Sirica and his prosecutorial insanity that only you can address in a legal manner.
Me and one other person.
Who's the other person?
An author named Renata Adler.
Adler.
On the House Impeachment Committee.
Yes, Adler.
Who wrote an article about Judge Sirica.
Okay.
That devastates him.
Right. Okay. We're going to have can you come back for a Sirica episode? Because I believe he's an unindicted co-conspirator.
Well, he should have been impeached from the bench. He was the most reverse judge. We'll come back and do that. But thank you for tonight. We've had a wonderful time. I'm happy to come back. You are easily the most knowledgeable questioner of me, and it's a pleasure to work with you. And we include Eric because he keeps us honest.
Geoff, it's like sitting here with a professor. I feel I'm sitting here with the mastermind of solving this crime of the century, which is Watergate, from the other side, Geoff.
Let's mention our documentary. It's
the documentary. Go ahead.
www.watergatesecrets.com. Go buy the documentary. If you want, watch the Tucker interview. It's entertaining. And go on my website. You can order all the books.
Yeah,
off my website.
They're all worth it. The film, I can't wait to see the film because I haven't seen it yet, and I'm going to watch it this weekend in Arizona, where I'm going to be vacationing. But Geoff, thank you again. This is Geoff Shepard Part 2 now, and we're not done.
Thank you again.
Let's come.
Thanks, Geoff.
Thank you so much, Geoff. All right.
Wow, that was fun.
Definitely.
Oh my God.
Oh, I look forward to the Sirica because
Sirica's going to
be lit up.
That's going to be great. Sirica's because there's so many people involved. Edward Bennett Williams, all these different people. Murray Chotner, who he wants to go after. He'll explain it himself, but there's so much stuff on Sirica, and I've been reading his memoir. So he lies in his own memoir, which is the lowest you could go.
Definitely. All right. Well. Let's go ahead. We've got feedback coming in from our audience with Pamela very early on before we even started. Thanks, Geoff. Happy Tuesday, guys. $50, Pamela. I mean, coming in strong.
Oh, she got rid of that excess burden she was carrying around for so many months. Look, I made Hunley laugh. It's a breakthrough.
Oh, there you go.
Now she's alone in the photo, which is where she should be.
Yeah, she loves the picture of you at the replica of Nixon's desk. I saw it and posted on X. President Groubert.
That's great.
God help us.
That's great.
Pasha said replica Nixon desk, but not replica Mark, right? 556 Pew gifted 10 America's Untold Stories membership.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Pew, very much.
Well, the girl from the hotel, Ruby, just texted me thanking you for the challenge coin, Eric. From down at where we had the meetup, Chase Suites Hotel, thanking you for the wonderful coin.
Cool. And folks can get that on their own if they want to at
this is a wonderful commemorative item. I strongly recommend picking this up. These are real of substance that'll last. You could pass it on to your children and generation to generation.
Yeah, you really can. It's almost
as I saw in Pulp Fiction, the movie with a wristwatch that was passed on.
Do not report it in the same manner.
Oh boy, I got Hunley twice in a row there. Jesus Christ. Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just a throwaway.
There's a link
joke.
to the coin. There's a link to the coin.
The link to the coin of the realm.
AmericasUntoldStories.com/coin if you want to get one for yourself. They really are nice. They're almost an ounce in weight.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. Doc 5758. What do you think about RFK being kicked off of the New York ballot? We're
going to talk about that on Friday. So this is Watergate John Dean Day.
Yes, it is. Jason Willis said Trump 2024. Let's get out and vote. Scott Benbow, who we got to meet on Friday and Saturday.
Right on.
My childhood home was O'Malley's Lumber Kit, 1911. Had a great time. Maybe that's something like that.
Maybe that's where they got it from. The docent said that they investigated it for years and couldn't find, but they eliminated Montgomery Ward and Sears. But she said they never found the actual kit makers of the Nixon home. But maybe that's it.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Scott Bimbo again. Did Haig undermine Reagan? Jeff is the boss.
I will make that case when we get to Haig. I'm not going to go into Reagan, but I will make the case that I've made before that he is deep throat and Mark Felt is a leaker. But there is stuff at the end when the only man standing is Kissinger, Nixon, and Haig. So it's got to be one of the three.
All right. And he's continuing on. Did Haig with the Bush family try to undermine Reagan / kill Reagan?
That I don't know about. That's a separate investigation. I'm still focused on the Nixon administration. So I don't know what decade we're going to get to Reagan, but right now we're dealing with Nixon.
Definitely. You know what? 556 Pew Pew. Hold on. Here we go. You have donated so much in memberships and things like that. Contact me through America's Untold Stories.
Yeah, give him throw him a coin,
contact, bro. And I'm sure we could figure something out. But all right. Well, that was phenomenal. It's a bit of a fire hose of information. I think everybody is going to watch it multiple times or listen to it multiple times because
watch the Tucker one and rent his movie or buy his movie because I haven't seen it yet, but I understand it's fantastic. So I'm going to watch it this week and between now and Friday and talk a little bit more about it on Friday. But yeah, I mean, we get into the weeds because Geoff knows a lot more than I do, but at least I have questions that he can answer, which is great.
And he was there. I mean, how often?
Yeah, no. To me, it's like I'm talking to a living witness. I just go crazy over dealing with this guy because it's a link to history, American history.
And that he knew John Dean personally.
Yeah,
I didn't quite realize that with the cars.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. He did not like him, and I'll tell you something else. He was not alone. That's why he gave us that warning at the beginning. But litigious or not, I don't think he's ever won a case against his people. He's directed his. Yeah,
no, especially because he's a convicted felon.
Yeah,
so there's it's not unimpeachable. There's a term for it, or
I mean, he embezzled. He literally, and I don't know if we can get into it here or whatever, but he literally takes $4,000 out of Hunt's safe and goes on his honeymoon to Hawaii with his future wife, who we discussed in another episode.
Right. Okay. That might be it. Defamation proof or something. There are some people, if they're convicted enough, like, you could say anything you want about a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Ted Bundy. If there's a point that they're a felon and they really don't have much of a reputation.
He's a convicted felon. That's for sure.
So, but either way,
what do you want to do now?
We're going to go to locals, hang out there with our peeps, catch up on some tips here. Actually, let me double check one more thing before we go. See if anybody came in on Rumble. We did get a Rumble rant saying, as a kid, I bought the whole John and Maureen Dean masquerade.
Oh, there was like a Halloween disguise, I think, Halloween costume.
Okay, well, I guess there was that too.
I think there was a Halloween thing, yeah.
All right, but we'll head over to locals and answer some tips and chill out there.
Okay.